Driving change in maritime. Welcome to another episode of Teqplay Vodcast series. Today I will be talking to Pino Musolino, President of the MEDports Association. Together we will discuss collaboration and port call optimization from the MEDports perspective. Stay tuned to our conversation. Pino, good day. Welcome in our podcast. I'm so excited and happy to have you on our podcast series. We already did have a couple of conversations up front, but I think I would like to ask you to introduce yourself. Who is Pino and what is your role within MEDports and what is MEDports actually doing? I think that would be an interesting start.
Okay, thank you. First and foremost, thank you for having me here. Thank you. It's very nice of you. And I have been the president of the Port Authority of Venice from 2016 to 2020, and then from 2020 to 2025, July, I have been the president of the Port Authority of the Ports of Rome. In that 9 years, I have contributed together with the Port of Marseille to give birth to this association in June 2018, MEDports, that started as a group of around 20 port authorities representing both sides of the Mediterranean. And back then I was the first vice president and first signatory part. And then in 2023, on February, I took over the presidency. And since then, we have enlarged the association up to, at the moment, 31 members, four training institutes. And in a nutshell, the association represents what is now the 70% of the whole cargo throughputs of MEDports and 90% of all the passengers that are transiting in the Med. So we expanded it so much so that we have even enlarged it to the Portuguese ports, which one may say, well, it's not Med, but it's a naturally attracted area to the Med, and also to the port of Nouakchott, which is again outside the Med, but immediately after the Gibraltar Strait. So it's an enlarging and an ever growing association. Main members are port governing bodies, so they could be port authorities or ports associations. For example, the Hellenic Ports Association is altogether members, also with standalone ports like Heraklion or Igoumenitsa, as well as the Egyptian ports or blocks of ports like the OMMP in Tunisia or the ANP in Morocco, and they are representing almost the whole totality of the ports of their country. So I think that the most important intuition of this association, which is an NGO, it's a non-profit association, was to put around the table two sides of the Mediterranean Sea, or actually three sides, because we've got the Near East, the North African, and the European sides, so that we naturally created bridges and cross-border contacts where normally we tend to think in a very compartmentalized way. Europeans are talking to the Europeans, and Africans to the Africans, and the Arabs to the Arabs. So it's in the nature of a port to interact with other countries, and so we thought it was about time to speak a common language, or at least to create a forum where we could share the same point of views and maybe learn from each other.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, right? Ports are connected, and yet every port is different. I think I always like this saying, if you have seen port, you've seen one port. But I guess still there is a lot of ground and common ground that needs to be discussed, because the vessel is departing from port A, arriving at port B to do its cargo operations, and a lot of information needs to be exchanged. So that completely makes sense. Yeah, but I like the sentence that you were building bridges between the ports, and I thought, whoa, that's going to be a big bridge if you are going to cross the Meds to the African ones.
Well, as a Venetian-born person, I build bridges by nature. It's in my DNA.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Pino, let me ask a question. I always like this to ask this question for our audience. It's like people know a lot of ports. A lot of the listeners are also working in ports or in one or the other way relating to ports. But often there are those facts that people do not know or tend to forget about ports. If I ask you this question, what is the thing that people should know about ports that they rather tend to forget or that needs more attention? What would that be from your perspective?
Oh, well, I would say that normal people, the commoners that are not working in ports, don't know a lot of things about ports. First, ports are great hub of innovations. They are great places for job creations and innovative solutions. We are energy-borne infrastructures, so we are the ideal test bed for the energy transitions technologies. We are tendentially, productive semi-industrial or industrial areas, so we tend to have a natural heavy carbon footprint. So we are the best place where we can implement and improve technologies. We are an added value for any city that has the luck to claim to have a port in its territory. But for many years, the ports were some sort of cities within the cities. Of course, also for obvious reason, ISPS, ISM, custom and border controls. But in the old times, and you're from the Netherlands, so you know that as well as I know. The ports were the core, the living, pulsating heart of any city, and you can see that in the identity and in the personality of any port city, no matter where they are located. So ports can be, if properly handled with the right relationship with the town and the citizen, can be really a great slingshot for development and sustainable development too.
Okay, cool. I think also ports and cities are kind of related because there are a lot of people working in port actually. You need to have people who are doing the work, right? And that is why the city will need the port.
Yeah, but if you are not working in the port and if you have no relatives working in the port, ports tend to be seen as a negative externality. And instead, it should be made clear also to the people that are not receiving direct advantages from having a port, that having a port in your area, it's a significant plus.
Yeah. And what I also do like about ports and people who are working in ports is the pride. I think I really enjoy the pride that people have in their work and what they are making happen at a global scale. If you talk about global trade, if you talk about all the goods that we are consuming, they need to be shipped. 90% is shipped over water. So we definitely do need ports. Interesting, you have this big group of ports that are collaborating. You are exchanging ideas, information, knowledge exchange. If you look into that and look into the field of optimization, port call optimization, how is that perceived in the various ports that you are representing as MEDports?
Well, as you pointed out correctly, there's not a port identical to another, but we tend to face the same troubles or issues. So there is a lot of creativity, if you want, among the members and among the solutions that are applied or found. And so already having a big round table where you can share best practices and make somebody else having an intuition or learning something or implementing something that works somewhere else, and you can scale it up or scale it down. That's something very, very useful and significant. Plus, particularly in those horrible years of COVID and immediately after COVID, the knowledge and the feeling that we were not alone and that we had similar issues and similar troubles, and that we were coming out of that together by sharing infos, by sharing the ways that we were doing things and finding operative solutions. That was really an added value in terms of being members of MEDports.
And what are typically the topics that are being discussed between the ports? Can you enlighten us a bit on that path?
Well, the two major, let's say, broadly speaking, the two major issues are technological innovation slash digitization and decarbonization, if I may say in this way, and the energy transition, which is a sort of like a link in between the two major boxes. And time is running, and somehow the pace of the decision makers and the pace of the legislator is significantly slower than the pace needed by the markets and the industries. So, and we are in between as a sort of like as a buffer. But the answers have to be given and solutions have to be implemented. Otherwise, jobs can be lost or opportunities can be lost.
Yeah. I think what I also find fascinating is like you are building bridges between the different continents. You mentioned the African world, the European world, the Arab world, and those kind of things. You've been in that role for quite a while. You have been engaging with all those parties. What would you say are the major differences, or what are the bridges that have to be built?
Well, I am a proud European. I am married with a Finnish lady whom I married in UK. I'm married in Belgium and met in UK. So I can't be blamed as an anti-EU. But I would say that, the joke that says, US innovates, China produces, and Europe legislate. It's even more so in the port sectors. I would say that it's impressive, the vitality and the energy and the creativity that you can find in certain areas of the North African sites. I think about Tangermed, I think about the Tunisian ports, I think about the Egyptian ports, for example. And somehow it's kind of impressive that the European counterparts, we tend to be, locked into colossal amounts of rules, regulations, very often contradictory regulations, or unsubstantiated goals. Let me make a typical example. There was recently an intention about EU institutions to make OPS, the so-called onshore power supply, compulsory in all European ports by 2031, and then somebody were talking about 2027. And I was honestly and in good faith asking to them, how many years is it that you haven't visited a European port? Because that means that you're just setting up an unrealistic goal, which is working nice on paper, but you're not coming to the ports, looking at the infrastructures and understanding what's the hurdles and how many ports can do that. So I would say that I was recently visiting Tangermed, and Tangermed is an example of how you can create in less than 20 years state-of-the-art, top-notch port infrastructure that works excellently, flawlessly, with a very young leadership. And I'm not spitting on my side. As I said, I love to be Europeans, but you can't find anything like that on the European side. And the speed and the spirit, as you said, and the pride of being part of that great and visionary project. It's hard to reproduce it in Europe because we have the intuitions, we have the ideas, we have the will, we have the capacity, but sometimes we are completely intertwined in a network of rules that are kind of very hard to decipher.
And what does need to happen? What are the calls to action that we can get out of this?
I would say, port business and shipping business is a hands-on business. It's in the old times when you were saying port workers, it was a synonym of hard, tough guys with a tendency to get drunk in the evening. I'm fifth generations of port people, so I know what we're talking about. We need to bring the legislators, the decision makers. They need to see what happens in the ports and what is necessary in the ports before creating unachievable rules, or I call them poster rules. Those laws that you make just to look good, but they are not creating anything decent. And so I think that the most important thing, the wisdom of the elders was whoever knows does. Okay, and so you have to know before you can do something, and you need to be humble enough to ask when you don't know, and learn and study and question the things that you think you know. And I would say that there are a lot of assumptions and prejudices that are made over ports, or a lot of superficial conclusions, while what we need now is hands-on, the creation of a financial ecosystem that is allowing public-private investments, particularly in the sustainability, energy transition business. And another thing that is rarely talked upon is that we need to form the people, the women and the men, that will handle and manage the ports of the future. Ports are not working by their own. Yes, there are automatization of ports, and it will maybe go even further, but the human factor is there. And if we don't give the necessary tools to the new managers to see the future and to see the opportunities that are lying in the future, well, we're going to have a big trouble.
Mm-hmm. I love that part about the people. I think understanding, if you want to change something, you need to have an understanding of what you change. But I would like to zoom in also on that people part. What do we need to do to attract the right people? What is on the agenda? How do we actually get people into the ports business? How do we connect, as you were saying, the city and the port again? What is that something?
That's a very good question, Leon, and I'm grateful for that. Well, first we need to talk. Also, from the port side, from the port management side, we need to get out of our, ivory tower within the port structures, and we need to get out. It takes efforts, and sometimes it's really tiresome. But we need to create those bridges that I was mentioning in the beginning, and moreover, thanks to the technological innovations, the brute force is not anymore the major element of the workforce in ports, and that, quite surprisingly, if you want, is a great gender equalizer. So more and more women can and could work in ports. It's not just a male only sector anymore. Mm-hmm. But if you never present this as an opportunity, you don't go to the high schools, secondary schools, and universities and tell people that there is this chance and that there is this huge environment where you could be an engineer or a designer or an architect or an operation manager or a safety manager, security manager, or a marketing manager, whatever, you name it. It's plenty of jobs. But of course, if the mainstream message is always, you need to go to finance or to, banking or something apparently or allegedly cooler, then it's sort of like you shut off a bit of opportunities for people that are maybe not aware of that. Mm-hmm. Even great ports, think about Rotterdam or Antwerp. Sometimes they struggle to attract new talents because they take it for granted that new talents are willing to go there, while these new kids are probably unaware on one side and could be a very receptive, generation for innovate and create a new court of port managers of the future. That we need to talk more, get out of our offices, get out of our self-aggrandizing seminars and forums where we all pat our shoulders and tell how cool we are, and we need to start humbly presenting the ports as a chance of growth to the rest of the world.
I'm with you. I think there are still a lot of opportunities, right? There is a lot of complexity in ports, a lot of complex puzzles that need to be solved. I always like myself the optimization. A port call optimization is getting alignment between up to 28 actors and making sure that you make a good decision for as many as possible in that sense. I think that is going to be key. Maybe on the digitization and technology part. If you think about technology and the next wave that is coming up, AI, is that being discussed within MEDports as well? Is that on the agenda? And what is your take on that?
Well, of course, it is on the table, and it's a topic that it's raising at the same time a lot of interest and a bit of concern. But the natural tendency of human beings towards great breakthrough innovations is a bit of a fear. We tend to be a very conservative species in a sort of way. But then every time there is a great leap ahead in technological innovation, you have so many opportunities and roads that are opening before your eyes, even uh, opportunities that you wouldn't see or you couldn't have seen before. So of course we don't know exactly yet, in certain places more clearly, in certain places more in an experimental stage, what could be the uh, um, applications and sub applications and sub applications of AI, but for sure AI, IoT, Internet of Things, industrial Internet of Things, super broadband as 6G, all those things can create a mix between the physical world, the digital world, the goods that are talking to each other, the reefer container that is talking from the ship to the cargo owner. Listen, I have a malfunction and something is wrong, and so it. This is very easy and simple example, but you name it. You talk about port optimization. Think about the idle time. The trucks are waiting at the berths or waiting at terminals in order to load. And when you could optimize the time of arrival and the time of pickup with a perfect AI real-time self-learning system that could avoid unnecessary idle time, unnecessary queues, unnecessary engines on that are polluting nearby the cities. And all these things are not even a fantastic future. They're there. You just need to connect, like in the knitting. You need to knit together two technologies that are already there. And of course, we need to dare, well, not crazy, but we need to dare to experiment, to be open to cross-border knowledge. And in this, either by creating opportunities to invest to the private sector or by funding. I would like to say something clear and loud because it's not said often enough. Energy transition, no matter what, it's going to be expensive. And it cannot be paid only by the private sector, or it cannot be paid only by the public sector. But if we all agree that it's a priority, well, then we need to create the system, the rules, the tools in order for that to happen.
Yeah.
So technology and the innovations can help us really, really a lot. And in the next 10 years, my take is that we're going to see more changes in the way that we are doing port business in the next 10 years than in the last 150 years. Absolutely. I can bet on that. But we need to be ready to do that. We need to be ready to accept the change of perspective, and we need to be bold, with the feet on the ground, but the gaze on the future.
Yeah. Why do you believe that the coming 10 years will bring more change than the last 150 years?
Well, actually, in the last 4 millennia, the port business was, you have something floating. First was small boats, then wooden boats, then ironclad boats, then big container vessels, and you had some cargo on a berth and somebody that physically or with a crane were moving them on a ship. Pretty much that was the business from prehistorical times to today. Very soon, you're going to have the use of drones for the last mile technology, the last mile connectivity. You have optimization, absolutely automatized terminals. You have vessels that are working on different propulsion energies, optimizations of hulls, paintings, coatings. It's going to be so different. And if you combine all these tiles, you are going to have a fantastic mosaic.
Yeah, cool. The thing that always fascinates me, as long as I've been in the industry, is the reluctance to change. I think we're working in a world which is about operational excellence. So actually changing something is the risk of breaking a machine which has been running for quite a while and has been running quite smoothly.
Yeah, but if that would be the
how do you
approach,
look
we
at
would
change
still be
management
in
in
a
that?
cave.
Sorry?
I mean, if that would be the mindset, we would still be in a cave with a bat and a fire, And the great gift of humanity is that we are a curious animal. We always wonder what's next. That's why we have ports,
Yeah.
because one guy one day was standing on a shore, saw the sea, and said, "I want to see what's beyond that place." And probably on the other side, there was a guy that was making the same thought. So, I think that of all the businesses, ports and shipping is the one that was always animated by a great hunger for curiosity, expansion, knowing what's behind the line of the horizon. So I guess that we need to remember that more
Yeah.
often to ourselves, because the horizon now it's really, really far-fetched.
Yeah. No, and I think I'm with you on that one. I think there are some people who are always in a hurry, and I think if you're in a hurry, change cannot happen quickly enough in that sense. So I think that is something which is happening within these systems as well. It takes a while, but over the entire time period, it might not be that significant. I'm looking on. We touched on a lot of things. One of the topics I think you are starting off with collaboration, bringing all the MEDports together. What do you see as a next step for MEDports in this area of collaboration? What are the things that are where will collaboration bring actually the next step?
Well, the thing that from the inception has been very, very useful in terms of MEDports is the training committees. We do periodically a lot of training events for our mainly for junior and mid management. Not because the high management is self-aware and full of knowledge, but because it's very, very important that all that new knowledge and all that new capacity is passed down the line, so that the actual junior will be the senior in 5 or 10 years. Because I think that we all are carrying a baton on a relay competition. So the best takeaway that I could say from this experience is that we managed to have 4, 5, 6 moments per year, changing places and changing ports. Members where our members can send their workers, they can share time together, they can put a face on a name, for example, which you may think it's a silly thing, but it's a game changer. And they can understand that they have more things in common that differences, and that they all share very often the same headaches and the same pressure, and they can learn from each other and see that things sometimes a small no-brainer solution in one place is a game changer in another, because simply that place didn't manage to get there already. And this is all done by this exchange of knowledge in presence more often than not, and by the fostering also human relationships.
I like this image of passing on the knowledge, the relay game, making sure that it gets handed over to the other communities and the other people next in line. Pino, I really would like to thank you for being on our podcast. It was really a pleasure having you in. Learned a lot about the MEDports, and really looking forward to visit you in Naples.
Whenever you want.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Have a good day. Bye.